I hate editing videos. Something about the idea of putting in an hour to get a minute of content out doesn't really inspire me to be productive, and every idea I have will only last a couple of seconds on screen, so there's a lot of demoralising slog to fill a video completely. That spawned this audio only idea. Go put this on and go be productive. How many dishes have you got stacked up by the sink? Do you need to do the laundry? And enjoy this procrastination disaster that brought me to this format. My previous video was about a driving physics demo I was building, which you won't be able to access anymore because the game engine I used, Unity, doesn't deserve any more attention. My plan was to quickly move across to another game engine, and surely I could carry over my progress from Unity relatively quickly while fixing bugs along the way. For all of you out of the loop, approaching 2 months ago now, Unity made the gaming equivalent of Audi's recent motorsport plans. They wanted to charge the developer every time someone installed their game, albeit if you pass certain thresholds. To be realistic, the thresholds they set were never going to trouble me, but it takes a certain amount of hubris to make a game in the first place. I'm already doing this out of a belief I'm going to do it better than anyone else can. I'm going to assume I'll be messed up by scummy business tactics. Other changes they made include obscuring their old terms of service and trying to change their current TOS to overrule the old ones. Since then they backpedaled like they've sound a bike the wrong way, and it means nothing to me. Starting again seemed like prime time to start a devlog, but by now you know I hate video editing. Writing a script is easy, I straight up enjoy typing and coming up with how to get my point across. Recording audio is a nice challenge, I like my voice and YouTube is a good platform for getting myself out there. But I hate editing the final video together. I've confirmed this again recently because I got excited producing a video, spent all day writing a script, banged out the audio in about half an hour, even had music and this nice background visual you're seeing on YouTube all prepped up to save some workload. But God, an evening of editing got me 3 minutes in. It's hell. So that all inspired this sort of podcast format I've thrown into your recommended videos. Is a podcast the right word? Even this hypothetical question is scripted. It's more akin to an audiobook, seeing as the script for this is also on my website with links to stuff I mention. And to further set expectations, while the first video, and probably a fair portion of these, will be nerdy discussion about cars and so on, I do like talking about creativity in the process of making things. That's truly what I want this to be about. Just my creative processes happen to revolve around those technical discussions. Hopefully you can still see the forest for the trees and actually link these back to general practices and talk about getting things out there. Now to my very selfish and personal topic. I want to make racing games. I've got quite a few ideas about how to do driving physics and game mechanics, and I become quite heated and opinionated when I discuss them with friends. So now I want to actually be productive in some way with that energy. I think we should start with a question I didn't even realise I was asking myself at the start. When you're trying to make something realistic, what are you trying to achieve? And I'm not just trying to box this into game design, I mean in all cases. If you're drawing a picture, why are you trying to make it match a photo? If you're writing a story, why do you have human characters that live on Earth doing normal jobs? And there are a million valid reasons to do this, but I'd like to question our obsession with cloning reality. My goal for this driving model is and always will be a sort of simcade route. And I hate the word simcade because it's such a moving goalpost of a term that, depending on the person, can describe anything from Need for Speed Underground 2 to Gran Turismo 7. I'm going to use it to describe a racing game that uses slip ratios and slip angles in the tyre model, but doesn't go a whole lot further in terms of car detail. If you're not in the lingo, all that means is measuring the speed each wheel is spinning at, and using that to affect the grip on each tyre. This allows for things like wheel spin, brake lockups, and creating some depth in the way cars respond to inputs. You can make cars that theoretically have the same outright grip, but one could be quite snappy and responsive, while the other is more slidey and forgiving, by changing how grip changes with slip. And while that sounds complex, it's relatively simple to implement, with a couple of slight issues that cropped up because you end up dividing by 0 when the car stops, so you need a bit of a fudge factor involved to stop that happening. But yes, I want to go the simcade route because I don't think there's much fun to be gained with accuracy. At the end of the day, a game is meant to be fun, and I'd rather cheat or simplify in some way if it means I can better control the fun. Yet I'm not about to torch realism and reduce the car to something akin to FPS controls just because that gives the best control and variation. It's still got to drive like a car. As I said, there's multiple reasons the base should work in reality. I've got all these equations and work people have done before me to pull from. It'd be stupid to ignore such a nice baseline to start with. Even before starting, it made sense to add some base level of accuracy because I understand how to work with real cars. There's a lot I know and have learned, to the point that I think this is easier to make fun than doing something more basic. It's a nice middle ground between having a million different variables in a best attempt simulation and having barely any variables such as the 5 different stats in Mario Kart 8. One of the ways I'm shooting down the middle is with the suspension, in a lot of different aspects. I'll focus on spring setups. Just to reflect that I'm trying to keep this about creativity, I'll keep it simple. Simple being relative here. Try not to break your neck nodding along if you do know how to set up a car, and don't flame me for generalising, please. The way you tune a real car handling is through the balance of front and rear grip. There's a million ways of doing it, but at the racetrack with a complete car and limited ways to tweak it, it's done by adjusting the suspension stiffness in the front and rear. In most sim games you get specific values for the suspension stiffness. I'm generalising a lot here, but it comes in the form of a corner spring that stops the car hitting the floor, and another called the anti-roll bar. 0 prizes for guessing what that does. My issue is, it's not actually very useful to have specific values unless you're making relative changes, or you've already had them contextualised in some way. Having a spring of 200 newtons per millimetre means nothing without the rest of the car to judge it by. And if you jump into a completely different car, it means nothing squared. Cube it if you know nothing about the tyres, as pretty much every game hides that information. If you were one of 3 people who tried my driving demo, you saw that I used a simplified system, boiled down to a tuning item called LLTD, which stands for Lateral Load Transfer Distribution, and for people who don't like using words as sleeping aids, it's called the magic number. It's the percentage of weight transfer that the front wheel see when you turn. When you turn a corner, some amount of load moves to the outside. It's what causes body roll. If you had a magic number of 100%, you'd lift up the front inside tyre and squish the outside front. While the 2 rear ones don't notice a difference, this would make the car not want to turn. Hopefully you can extrapolate from that. Cars are a bunch of intermingling variables that make this a dynamic number in reality, but the goal is almost always to keep it static and controlled for predictable and fun driving. Now, if you were making a sim, you likely wouldn't ever use this number in your code. More games should display it somewhere though. It's a powerful tool for tuning cars, especially if the sim would be so kind as to provide tyre data like they should be. I've used it myself to help set up cars. Real race engineers will use it to keep track of their settings and compare changes. In a sim, like real life, you've got all the links in the suspension and the way the tyres affect the suspension stiffness and the specific values of each spring, which all output into the car handling. The magic number is just a way of representing the total output of a whole list of variables, so my argument is to turn it into an input. There's a lot of ways you can do this, in varying complexity. My way is the simplest. I'm calculating what the weight transfer should be, subtracting it from the springs, and then calculating the magic number adjusted weight transfer and adding it back, which means it is wrong, but it means the player can focus purely on inputs and outputs they can feel. Since it's abstracted, you can take what you learn from this and apply it to other cars. Say if you swap from a starter car with not much power or weight, to a heavyweight with a huge engine. In this scenario, both cars have a similar tyre setup and weight distribution, which isn't as unlikely as it seems. The later game car is heavier, they'll have bigger corner springs, but typically anti-roll bars don't vary much between cars because that incurs other handling issues, and the suspension would probably be different, so the magic number intrinsic to the car would be different. So in a normal sim, the same anti-roll bar change would have vastly different effects depending on how they get drained out by the corner springs, so you can't use past knowledge to help you insert specific values. But the magic number is useful because it describes how the forces themselves are being transferred between the wheels. It's never a one-size-fits-all method. Driving styles and other differences means you'll always be shifting it about a bit to be happy on a car and track basis, but it is far more relatable. The takeaway from this shouldn't be that it's a genius magic bullet idea. My idea is an approximation that I'm happy to make because it's more important to me than what I'm neglecting. This entire driving demo was born from the magic number, because there's no reason anyone should have to reverse engineer the physics and build a spreadsheet just to be scientific after every spring change. I want to encapsulate the important detail in one slider in a setup menu. Now that's the reasoning. Now I've got to take it somewhere. And there's a couple of choices. Godot seems like the obvious choice. It's free, open source, and there's no huge company ready to make a stupid business decision that destroys all trust I have for them. And Real Engine does have all the goodies and is powerful, but I've already seen what huge corporate greed can do, so I like my chances with the game engine that has a built-in get out of jail free card. So my question is, what language to use? Unity uses C# as its primary language. Godot has its own language called GDScript and also supports C#. But there's a far wider array of documentation in GDScript, which would hopefully save me when I get stuck and have to try and find help. And maybe having to reread and adapt my code can help fix the bugs and some questionable coding practices. I'm torn on this though. On one hand, momentum is key. Done terribly is better than a private prototype of perfection. It's so easy to keep carving away at a creation and inching into something you can't see flaws in. But that doesn't happen, ever. There has to be a time where enough is enough, and usually earlier is better. But at the same time, being too quick to give up and move on can lead to more trouble down the line, especially in coding where you're building up a house of cards. So a bit of ugly hacky code is better because forward motion done badly is better than stalling out trying to make the script equivalent to the Mona Lisa. There definitely is a point where the returns are diminishing. This transfers into all things: writing, drawing, music, actually making a game. I wasn't happy when the demo went out. Hell, I'm still not. The UI is bugged to hell, there's an issue with partially locked differentials, but it was out there and nobody cared except me. I also find this in making videos. This is by no means my first draft of this idea. I'm very conscious about it being my 10th take and still not very well read. But screw it, I need to get this out there. I actually started writing and struggling on the next part of this before it was done. I don't know if or when I'll have the next one ready. But I guess I'll have to figure it out, because I'm getting bored of holding off making things out of fear I can't keep it up. But to bring it back to coding, moving over makes sense. If I can fix some of the worst offenders of implementation while I'm skimming through it, great. If not, I've got a framework to dump in and forget about it. So I've decided on using GDScript. Moving it all means there's a new vocabulary and way of doing things to learn. In Unity, typing rigidbody.addForceAtPosition is burned into my memory, but in Godot, I've now got to figure out where the documentation is, which words are like for like, which ones use different terminology to describe the same things, which are completely unique functions and systems and workflows. So to do the exact same thing, even in two fairly similar interfaces and engine, is more of a hassle than it first seems. But it's doable. I've just got to get on with it, which will be a challenge. University is going to be a huge time sink. I don't really expect to get on with any games dev stuff in the close future beyond familiarising myself with Godot and slowly beginning to transfer my work over, which leaves me with plenty of time to use this space for other stuff. I don't intend on this being a purely game dev thing. I like talking about general creativity, what I'm up to, anything that I've come up with, and what I'm enjoying doing at the moment, so prepare for this to be a bit of a random pick and mix of things. And that's about 2,500 words, so this is probably a good length to end it off. The entire document is 5,000 long, making this a fantastic lesson in how to kill my darlings. When I read through some of the stuff I cut, I get really passionate, because talking about all the things race games do badly when it comes to car setup could fill hours of me detailing and ranting and ranting and ranting about the nonsense they stick in a menu to pretend they're realistic. But I'm going to save those for later, after I've got all those people who aren't budding race engineers hooked on my voice. And I hope your dishes are clean. Subscribe to Boost on Ethanol.